So I will start by the way of introduction for those who may not be familiar with Vinca's practice. Vinca is a British artist who is currently living in the crofting community on the Isle of Skye. She's been, her art, I'd say, is born out of her wide-ranging engagement with the world around her, and I suppose the conditions that actually made her identity and life possible. Her now iconic book, No System, which was published originally in 1999 by Edel, documented her life on the road as part of Sound Systems, where she was traveling throughout Europe, putting 3 parties together. Over a decade ago, she set up the Future Youth Project that was focusing on the humanitarian projects in Ukraine. And as a multidisciplinary artist who works in the area of social practice, her work is deeply engaged in working with communities and ideas of togetherness. Over the 30-year career, she has published 3 books, has showed quite largely and widely internationally, and has recently been included in the public collections at the newly opened National Portrait Gallery, as well as the Viennese Photography Center. So Vinca, this feels like quite a nice, I suppose, culmination of our conversations throughout these few months. And I think I'd like to start by kind of talking about how your life and your artistic practice is essentially intertwined and perhaps quite inseparable from each other.
Yeah, I think as a very gradual process, sort of the life and work became sort of separate, but the opposite. So I realized that very early on that I had more of an obsession with taking photographs than the average person. And it was kind of, it seemed very normal to me and very easy and just something I wanted to do all the time. I had a camera from the age of about 7 because my dad had taken photos. And it was always the reaction of other people that made me think, oh, I'm doing something a little odd, because they were like, why are you taking photos? Or, you know, it kind of created these stilted situations. So I kind of was aware that I was doing something other than, you know, just living my life. I had this like sort of thread going down the side of it. And then I suppose to fast forward it, I went to live in squats in London, which you could do when you were growing up in the 90s. And it meant that I was suddenly introduced to this vast kind of creative community in London, and creative in the way that I think all human beings are creative given the chance, you know. So if you're given a place to live, especially when you're younger, that you don't have to spend your entire life paying for, and you're surrounded by people with time and not so many money restraints, you know, suddenly I was amongst all these incredible sort of humans with this liberation. So, you know, I continued taking photos. I discovered the rave scene, having always gone to like dub reggae gigs and loving loud music and big sound systems. And then the rave scene came along and all that fun. And I carried on kind of photographing, but probably, like I always say, none of the really best photos were ever taken. And that's definitely true to form in sort of like 1989 to 91. There's not a lot of photography going on there. But then I kind of, as a result of the criminal justice bill, I had to think again about, I mean, I was basically faced with this choice to carry on working with the people I've been working with, putting on illegal raves, still photographing, and being constantly chased by police and hassled by police. And also the squatting movement was also starting to kind of collide with authorities. So you were kind of coming home and getting evicted all the time, and then you were trying to put on illegal raves. It sounds naive, but that's all we wanted to do. We just wanted to dance all night. And then you were just constantly at odds with the authorities. And although this was, you know, you could say this was a major political movement, I was still, at this point, 18, 19, 20. So I decided to move abroad with in a truck. I can go on to that later. And carried on photographing. And then one day I was sort of in my truck. I'd obviously been taking photographs of the people around me then by this point for sort of 7, 8, 9, 10 years. And people were always asking for photos. And in those days, it wasn't like, oh, you know, ping. It was you'd have to find an egg, you'd have to go somewhere, you'd have to have it reprinted, you'd then have to find the person again, which wasn't that easy, and give it to them. And that was also an expensive process. So I went to a friend of mine, a photographer in London that I'd met on a photo shoot. So this is the other side. So I was doing a bit of modelling in those days. The androgynous look was in. And so on one of these photo shoots, I'd met Corinne Day. So I had all these people saying, let me have some of your photos. And I went to Corinne and I said, look, I need to make 10 photo albums, one for each of the kind of sound systems I've been traveling with over these 10 years. So I had kind of migrated to different sound systems. I was not as fixed as some people were to their sound systems. That's another story, but anyway. So, and she said to me, the best thing to do would be publish it. And I was kind of like, oh my God, no way. You know, I'll get lynched, basically, because the whole of the free party scene was free music. It was our gift. It was, you know, it was about doing the opposite of you know, clubbing and selling and all the rest of it. So I was like, okay, all right, I'll meet the guy that you're working with and see what he says. So I went to meet Michael Mack, who was sort of putting together Corinne's book at the time. And he basically said, yeah, let's do a book. And I was kind of like, right, I need full editorial control, and it needs to be like less than a tenner so anyone can afford one. So, and we made the book. And I think I was the youngest female photographer to publish with Steidl at the age of 26. I was still living on the road. I used to drive up to the Steidl warehouse to get more books every now and then in the back of the van. Need some more, all right, you know. So at that point, a very long story short, at that point I suddenly realised, okay, well, no, it's not I realised, everyone kept calling me a photographer suddenly. So that was that point.
And I guess segueing from that into Mias and Dogs, you're presenting 4 diaristic constellations, all are loosely based around certain themes. So we have Parkonode, homes, dogs, side dogs, and self-portraits. Could you speak maybe a bit more about why you decided to focus on these specific, perhaps, subjects or memories?
I think what's important to think about is my archive. Susie, you're going to be right at the front. Hi. So a photography archive usually consists of a photographer's work where they have sort of subject matters where they go out and they set off to take pictures of something, usually. So it can kind of be dealt with in sections maybe or in topic areas. My archive is like a continuous thread. There isn't really a bit that you can kind of separate from the rest. So all my books, whether it's No System, which was taken over 10 years, or Deuce and a Quarter, which was taken over weeks, but they all have a narrative thread and they're all fairly chronological. And so what I've always been faced with is telling a story and obviously documenting, but having the freedom, because it was my work and it was about my life, to kind of include what I wanted up to a degree. But still they were kind of chronological and they had this thread. And I always kind of felt a bit of like I owed the people and the subject matter a broad enough view, to give other people a broad enough view of the subject, to explain it a little. So And then I was once, about 4 years ago, I was given asked to fill a 20-meter long wall. So this was for this part of the Sweet Harmony show at Saatchi. So then I was kind of, like, I'd always found it difficult to do exhibitions of my work, which were just single prints on the wall. We did one here. Charlie made me. And it worked well. But a lot of my work works in groups. So then I was faced at Saatchi with a 20-meter long wall, and my kind of reaction to that, I had this idea of a kind of a timeline, like I said, because there is always a thread through the work. And I just brought, again, not really with much of a plan, brought a lot of my archive into the gallery space, and I spent 10 days basically filling the wall with a kind of what was no longer a line, but a sort of miasma of the first pictures started when I was 7 and they went till I was about 40 something. And again, telling a very full tale, but kind of playing with it as well. But again, I'd kind of kept it chronological, and I felt like I should. I felt I had this structure. With this show, something else happened which was really like liberating and enjoyable, was that I kind of felt like I'd got to the point where I've shown a lot of work. I've explored the archive a lot. People know the archive if they want to. There's books on it. And I thought, I'm going to actually do something which doesn't make as much sense. So these 4 panels are kind of groups of images from the archive that, as I've been going through, have I see a lot of my memory is through my images, as with a lot of people, I'm sure. But memory kind of gets distorted by images as well. And these photos and these panels, I actually had a few more panels, but we sort of narrowed it down to these, somehow wanted to come together. There was some sort of magnetism in them, like within my visual memory or kind of within my mind, within my heart, somehow like some of these images just wanted to be together. And some of them, they're kind of still in obvious sort of groups. So I'll go around them a bit. But there were no rules as well when I put them together. So, no one's allowed to say that really wasn't there or that.
On that, can I ask you, how did it feel to go through those memories, like back in time and revisit certain situations, or because it was a process to try and narrow it down?
Well, as someone that tries to peddle subversive joy, which is one of my favorite kind of taglines, it's actually quite painful. It's quite difficult to look through an archive. It's just the intensity of memory and also that weird, we can come to self-portraits in a bit, but that weird thing of you kind of not really knowing yourself. And that can happen, I think, with sort of quite recent memories as well. Usually 5 to 10 years minimum, I'd say. And beyond that, it's just like, who is this? What is this? And obviously I've had quite a I don't know how you describe my life. But so
I guess we can go into each of them for a bit. So perhaps would you like to maybe start with Parc au Nord?
Yeah, keep looking.
I think one thing which I remember, and I don't know whether you would resonate in the same way, but like when you had a chat with Ed Gillett, the author of Party Lines back in Brighton, you were saying that some of your images actually depict the moments of quietness and the kind of stillness in between the party scene and the kind of the hectic life you had to live. And I think like for me, Parc au Nord is essentially that.
True, yeah, with No System as well, the book, I was very keen. Everyone was really obsessed at free parties with the speakers, number one, the DJs, number two. It was like, this was what it was all about. And all the pictures that ever came out of raves were, they were dancers, but they were DJs, sound system, And I lived with these people like 24/7. They were my friends. And so when I put together the book No System, it was kind of my joke. It was like, obviously No System has a political connotation, but it was also about having no pictures of the sound systems in there, so no systems. So, and I was very interested in the life, not interested, but I was living the full life of someone on the road, and that's what I wanted to put in the book. And with Parc au Nord, this is a kind of an example of a sort of site-specific example of that. So Parc au Nord is in Bologna, and if you live on the road, you are constantly looking for places to stop. And you're constantly getting moved on. And, you know, if you're in a little camper van, that's one thing. If you've got a convoy of 5 to 10 trucks with like generator trailers and everything and the chaos that comes with it, you're kind of obvious when you turn up somewhere. So Parc au Nord was a weird park because it had the kind of Bologna, part of the Bologna tangentiale around it, so like the motorway. And there was only sort of one bit that you could drive into the park kind of, so you were surrounded constantly by these cars going round. And so no one wanted to be there, but we loved it. So, and it was also where the kind of local municipality put the circuses for the winter, so the travelling circuses. So we would turn up, it was 2 winters in a row, we lived next door to a circus. And we would kind of go to sort of fix the trucks and just have a rest and to kind of plan our next foray. And it was just, it was one of those in-between spaces, a kind of lost space, a kind of autonomous space, and it had it was a very special place for me. I'm one of these slightly strange people that walks into a huge warehouse and feels very at home and happy. And Parc au Nord, this rough kind of park near Bologna full of rubbish and stuff, was one of those happy places for me. Anyway, so that board is about Parc au Nord and about the kind of weird, incongruous sort of mix of us and these like tigers and hippos, but again, a circus in its downtime too, which is kind of interesting. They're just kind of hanging around, but the animals don't sort of disappear over the winter. They're still there, so they're suddenly living kind of quietly with their animals, and we were sort of tinkering with our trucks.
And the ephemera that's also included, like what does that represent, those few posters? Okay.
Yeah, so they're flyers from the raves we did around the area. Again, just as a little side thing, it's quite interesting that, you know, the only copiers back then were black and white. And so all our flyers were black and white, and someone would, you know, whoever was the best at drawing at the time would like draw something, and then we'd do one and then copy it and then make sheets of them and then do A4 sheets and copy loads of those and then cut them all out. It was quite a process, a load of us in a row on a table, and then we would have to physically take them into the town and kind of hand them out. That was the only way people knew about the raves that were going on. And then we'd have a phone number that they'd call at like 11 o'clock at night to find out where the rave was. So those are some of those original flyers.
And given you kind of live such a nomadic and, in a way, life, you have a board that represents homes, which is kind of symbol and metaphor for settling down, whereas your life was kind of the opposite of that. Yeah. What do you think was the stimulus behind that?
Yeah, I mean, it subverts maybe slightly the idea of home in the sense that they're all pictures from inside vehicles that I lived in and squats that I lived in and a 4x4 that I lived in for a few months there. So, yeah, I think that it was partly inspired just by, like I say, memory and this kind of fascination I have anyway of like looking back, and that the whole of the middle section is, well, it's kind of a bit abstract at the sides, but the middle section is the inside of one of my trucks, and I kind of was looking at it and thinking, well, it was interesting that I recorded it like that. So I did a sort of photo montage of it, which I'm not quite sure why you would do that. You know, I mean, who's photographed the inside of their bedroom lately or their living room? It's kind of like, it's not something you would do. I don't know why I did it, but I'm glad I did. And looking into it, what's weird about memory is I remember things, like I really remember the kettle. You know, I think we have quite intimate relationships with our kettles. you know, a few times a day they sort of bring us comfort. That's sort of the first thing you grab. But then I can't remember things like, as obviously my towel and my sofa and my book. I can't remember any of them, which is weird. But they were still this very important place for me. This was home, and all my homes are very temporary, but it didn't matter. And interestingly, my son, who's now 18, I said to him once, you know, because we've moved a lot since he was little, although I'm not in traveller sites, and I said, you know, does it, you know, how does it affect you? You know, does it bother you that we move so much? You know, that I'm always sort of moving, like we're always leaving our home, I said. And he just said, no, home's wherever you and Betty are. Betty's my dog. And I thought, right, okay, so he's got it too, so that's nice.
And I guess interesting thing to touch on as well, which you've mentioned before to me when we were chatting, is that compositionally, this is the first time where you actually looked at the physicality of how you construct these images together, and that you enjoyed the process quite a bit.
Yeah. It's interesting because even talking now, I'm kind of like, I'm talking in the way I've been used to talking, but actually the process of putting these together is something very new for me, which was a kind of an idea and then an edit, but then the last edit, or the last maybe 6 days here, was it 5 days? 6, I can't remember. Putting it all together became a lot about the surface of the images and the colours and the lines, and that was really liberating, to actually not feel I had to tell the whole story of something, but actually enjoy the way the images work next to each other.
And I guess...
Yeah, it was really fun to do that. That was a really nice bit. That was a really relaxing bit.
It would be also interesting, you mentioned that you have difficulty before, that you find it challenging to present one picture at a time. And I guess I wonder, like, this act of taking pictures, like putting them on the walls, like what does that mean to you? Like capturing those moments and then assembling them in these like collages that have then totally different life on their own.
I mean, I think as with any artist or any of us, anything we do creatively, it's sort of an impulse, isn't it? You don't, and I suppose the difference between someone like me that has now accepted that I'm an artist and I'm working with the lovely Edel Assanti, is that I kind of follow those impulses and enjoy them and, you know, hold them up, literally put them on the walls. I can't remember what you said.
That's fine. I guess I'll go back a thought when you mentioned your son and your dog and your relationship to animals. We were chatting about the dog called Come On, who you lived with and rescued from a bar in Spain. And obviously one of the boards or constellations here is called Side Dogs. Could you kind of maybe talk a bit about this human-on-human relationship with the dogs?
Well, this is my sight dogs. Again, it was something that was sort of beyond my control. They had to come together. They just always peeked at me from the archive, you know. And it's kind of my ode to these animals, or animal kind of feeling that they brought to us all the time. And they were characters. I'll talk to you about Come On in a minute, but it's kind of my my expression of what I felt they were for us. So, you know, we lived in the French always used to love to call us tribes, and, you know, it's a difficult word for me, but it actually described us well. You know, we were in a tribe, and the dogs were in a pack, but as far as they were concerned, we were their pack. You know, they ran quite freely around us. They were always there. They were in and out of they were always, you know, fighting and playing, and most of them didn't have leads or collars. And to me, they were just this sort of background that was always there. And, you know, there's the obvious stuff like the unconditional love that, you know, you can get from a dog particularly. but also it was just this reminder of wildness and animalness. And I've tried to go to some like commercial festivals, and I've enjoyed it up to a point, but there's always a point, usually when I get a bit tired or I'm just kind of sick of seeing advertising or like wondering what to, spend the next tenner on. And I sort of think, where are the dogs? Where are the dogs? It'd be so nice if there were just a few dogs running around, and they kind of just bring us back to the animal in us, and I think that's very important. And Come On, I'll tell you the story of Come On, shall I, briefly? So, Come On, where is she? She was in the bottom right top picture, there's a little dog with a tan face, black and tan, basically. So a lot of our dogs sort of ended up with us. Come On was found tied up outside a bar in Spain, she'd been there like 2 days in a row in the hot sunshine. So some of the lads had just gone, right, we're bringing her back. She'd just been left. And they brought her to site. I wasn't there at the time, but they brought her to site. And apparently there was a sort of hill near the site, and she sort of ran to the top of this hill and just sat there all day in the boiling hot sunshine. And they spent the whole time going, come on, trying to get her to come down. And she'd sort of come down and have a bit of food, but not really. And she was really weird. Apparently she'd sort of eat vegetables, but not meat. And she was a very odd dog. But she ended up being, a friend of mine had her, and this friend of mine said, I'm just going back to England to like finish college, or no, to stop my college, that was it. And then of course she went back to England, never came back. So I ended up with Come On, who I changed her name to Freak in the end because everyone just called her a freak. So there was another little thing, just to put into context what dogs can do. I don't know how many of you will remember, but when you used to drive around Europe, you had to stop at the borders. And some of those borders were quite harsh. So they were pretty hardcore. One of them was the Austrian border. And we would arrive, obviously you'd arrive, these huge trucks. I mean, at one point, Interpol had a kind of a thing out for trucks that were painted black and silver. A lot of our trucks were painted black and silver, but that was like the whole of Europe were kind of looking for these trucks. So we would kind of turn up and they'd be like, oh my God. And they would ask for your passports, your driving license, your insurance. And we had people that were going and buying like all the Russian army trucks that were kind of left over when Russia left parts of Germany and the Czech Republic. And they were just turning up on site going, bought this for like 300 quid. And so these were parts of the convoy as well. So obviously nobody had, a lot of people didn't even have passports. And one of our tactics would be to turn up at the border and everyone would just get out of the trucks and start chatting, and then all the dogs would like pour out of the trucks, and it was just, and there's these sort of Austrian border guards, and it was sort of quite scary for us too, because if they kind of got you on your own, you were often in trouble. But this element, I think, I remember it really well. A few of us got out and they were asking for papers, and we were like, others were trying to hide in the back of trucks, and we were kind of trying to like, smoke screen. And then I just remember these dogs pouring out, and the guards were like, what do we, and they were just, it was just too much. And they just kind of went, okay, just go. And we all got through the border with, no papers. So dogs good.
Yeah. And thinking about self-portraits and the fact that the majority of the pictures that are included in these constellations, they are from the 14-year-old period. This brings us to now, and you mentioned to me that this poses more questions than answers. I wondered if you could reflect on it a bit more.
Yeah, I think that we all go through a phase of sort of being interested in our surface, particularly when you're young. The slightly strange thing about some of these images from when I was quite young is that the effort I'd have had to go to take it, because I would have had a film camera, which often wouldn't really focus. You couldn't really do selfies that easily. A few of them are, but so you would have to kind of place your camera somewhere. You'd have to really consider what you were going to do. You'd have to place your camera somewhere, and I kind of didn't want necessarily portraits. I wanted it to be natural, so it was like there aren't many of these in the archive, but there are a few, and I think it was weird that I don't really, it's questions. So why did I take these pictures of myself? Why didn't I ask someone else to take a picture of me? Why did I take them at all? Because if you're interested in what you're looking like at the moment, with film it takes 2 or 3 weeks to kind of get it together to go and develop them and print them, and then you have it back. What relevance has it got? Was it just narcissistic, but then, you know, I would have tried to make myself look as good as possible. It was just, I think, some sort of way of me like positioning myself in a moment or in a situation and wanting to, I don't know, wanting to see myself in that moment as well as just capture that moment myself, you know, what was going on around me. But I think also an interesting thing is that as I was looking for more of these self-portraits in the archive, they thinned out as I got older. They thinned out, and I thought, well, obviously your surface changes as you get older. So was that it? Was that why I stopped taking pictures of myself? But then I thought, well, you know, you fill out in other ways, don't you? You become more whole as a human, so it becomes less about surface and more about your inner world or your whole world. And then I found that one up there, and that was kind of, there was a big gap between these and that one, and I thought, okay, so I was interested again to take a picture of myself, but masked. I had to be masked. So again, that was like, why was that? And then I was talking to quite a few women about this over the last sort of 6 months. But both of them actually, or 2 of them said, why don't you start taking more? So I took this summer. And that was just, I was digging potatoes on the Isle of Skye and thought, oh, I'll capture this. Again, I don't know why. Why do we do it? Don't know.
But I guess what's interesting is that you work with film camera rather than like instant digital, where now like taking a selfie is so easy. So there's always a distance between like the picture that you took and the time that you could actually look at it back.
Exactly. And I think maybe I've become, you know, we're all used to a selfie, and a selfie is about the moment, really, isn't it? Or, well, I suppose it's also about recording that moment for the future too. You want to place yourself in a situation. But and I think this might be the beginning of something. So that's.
And I guess another, and probably to wrap up and open it to the audience to bring questions. The Joseph Beuys idea of social sculpture, you've mentioned that a few times, and it feels like that's very important to you, especially like his ideas around the community. Could you perhaps talk just a bit more about it? How you...
Yeah, so I went, when Archie, my son, was 2, I was a single mum, and much as I loved my child, I came up with this genius plan of going to art college one day a week. So I was going to, I'd left school when I was 17, so I only had GCSEs, and I thought, right, I can hand my baby over to mum once a week because I'm going to college. So I found this course, and it was 6 years long. So 1 day a week for 6 years, I handed him over, bless his cotton socks, and went into a place where I could learn and eat loads of lovely hot food cooked by other people. So I kind of went there, and I decided not to go as the photographer that I was, but just to go and see, you know, find my skills. And I quite quickly discovered I wasn't very good at making stuff. But I was really enjoying reading and talking to people about ideas. And I came across Joseph Beuys's work. Now, in many ways, I'm not a huge fan of Joseph Beuys, but some of his stuff I found incredible. And one was his theory on, or his ideas of social sculpture. So rather than sculpting an object, you would sculpt a situation, or you would sculpt people or a group or a community. And there was this kind of moment where I realized that could bring together these three threads of my life that I'd sort of wanted to join up, which were my traveling, my photography, and a new kind of sense of wanting to give something back, a humanitarian kind of urge I had in me at that age. So I brought them all together in something called the Future Youth Project, which was a humanitarian organization that I ran for 12 years. But it started at college, and the idea was to take people to the Ukraine. I'd visited the Ukraine a few times taking aid. And so the art project was to buy a bus and to fill it with anyone that wanted to come, and to go to one of these orphanages I've been working with. This particular one had male adults with special needs who were amazing and great fun. And so the art project, I basically put a bus stop up in the college and said, anyone that wants to come. And I ended up with a bus with 10 people on, and all different folk. I had a 40-year-old man that had never left the UK or his mum's house in a lot of ways. I had someone that had been dubbed on one of the crime programs, the M25 Bandit, because he had been an armed robber and always got away around the M25. And he'd been in prison his whole life, but was now working with youth, the youth of London. So he came, and then I had my friend and her daughter who had MS, and a whole bunch of us went, and we went this sort of merry ship of us. And we went and we worked with these men out in Ukraine, and it became this amazing kind of cyclical giving in which, like, we all felt good about ourselves because we were helping, we were bringing joy and pleasure to these men, and these men were obviously feeling great because we were turning up and, you know, relieving their intense kind of boredom in this place they were in. And we set up a classroom within the institution. They had been previously pretty much tied to beds and locked in rooms and had nothing to do. So, but there was a lot of joy there. I won't end on that. I'll end on the fact that we had an amazing time. We ended up traveling out there about 8 times. So that was my social sculpture, which actually ended 6 months ago. So.
And are you sculpting in sky as well?
Yes.
Okay. We'll look forward to hearing about it.
Yeah.
Thank
yeah.
you.
Thank you. Thanks for listening so patiently.